Looks like it is. Looks like things are cooking. Yep.
Let's
Yep.
see.
Here it is. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm John Miglash for the Wisconsin TMA and the International Society for Strategic Marketing. And here we are together again. What do you know about that? Okay, so let's dive in. I got a lot to talk about today, as always. Well, not as always. Let's go over here. Probably this isn't going to work right because it almost never does, but it did. Oh, let's see if that does. No, that didn't. Let's go back over here. Oh, that's why. There we go. We're going to listen to Joe Rogan a little bit, and we're going to talk about Joe and distribution and business models.
The podcast has been accused of spreading dangerous misinformation, specifically about two episodes, a little bit about some other ones, but specifically about two. One with Dr. Peter McCullough and one with Dr. Robert Malone. Dr. Peter McCullough is a cardiologist, and he is the most published physician in his field in history. Dr. Robert Malone owns 9 patents on the creation of mRNA vaccine technology and is at least partially responsible for the creation of the technology that led to mRNA vaccines. Both these people are very highly credentialed, very intelligent, very accomplished people, and they have an opinion that's different from the mainstream narrative. I wanted to hear what their opinion is. I had them on, and because of that, those episodes in particular, those episodes were labeled as being dangerous. They had dangerous misinformation in them. The problem I have with the term misinformation, especially today, is that many of the things that we thought of as misinformation just a short while ago are now accepted as fact. Like, for instance, 8 months
Digital
ago, if you
media.
said, if you get vaccinated, you can still catch COVID and you can still spread COVID, you would be removed from social media. They would ban you from certain platforms. Now, that's accepted as fact. If you said, I don't think cloth masks work, you would be banned from social media. Now, that's openly and repeatedly stated on CNN. If you said, I think it's possible that COVID-19 came from a lab, you'd be banned from many social media platforms. Now, that's on the cover of Newsweek. All of those theories that at one point in time were banned were openly discussed by those two men that I had on my podcast that have been accused of dangerous misinformation. I do not know if they're right. I don't know because I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm just a person who sits down and talks to people and has conversations with them. Do I get things wrong? Absolutely, I get things wrong, but I try to correct them. Whenever I get something wrong, I try to correct it because I'm interested in telling the truth. I'm interested in finding out what the truth is. And I'm interested in having interesting conversations with people that have differing opinions.
That's probably enough. Now, if you search for Joe, what's really interesting to me is you'll find all kinds of articles. Everybody's got a take on Joe Rogan and on these episodes. And the hard part about it is that the takes are here's a good one. Here's a good example. Media Post, which I quote often. Carlene Lukovitz, I don't know her for sure. I don't know for sure that I know her. I'll reach out to her. I'll tag her with this. So she's welcome to come on the show and defend whatever it is I said about her. But I'm not going to say anything really about her. But Rogan apologizes. Okay, well, I listened to that now. I think 4 times I've listened to that little apology. And the apologies run like this. If you're pissed off, I'm sorry. You know, that's like saying to your wife, I'm sorry you're upset. I'm not sorry with what I did. I'm sorry you're upset. That's exactly it wasn't an apology. He was just saying, I didn't mean to upset you. But if you got upset, well, that's something. I didn't, it's sorry you got upset. Vows. I love that. Vows to balance. Well, he said, there's some things I can do. When I have a controversial speaker on one side, I can get an opposing controversial speaker that, the next episode or something. I could try to do that. He said, I'd like to do that. But, I'm sure the scheduling and all that is a nightmare. Anyway, yeah, and they're going to have an advisory panel to go over So if you don't know what this is about, Joe Rogan had two shows, one by this cardiologist and one by Dr. Robert Malone. I listened to that one for maybe an hour, and Robert Malone's credentials section, he said, "Why don't you give me your credentials to start with?" And Dr. Roberts said, "I'll give you a shorter version." And I could not believe it. I mean, all the things he's done with Harvard, with the National Institute of Health, with World Health, with the Department of Defense, for viral threats and this kind of stuff. It went on 20 minutes, and some of the notable work he did was at the University of Wisconsin. So yay for that. Since this is the WDMA, and I went to the 2 degrees, University of Wisconsin. So it was shocking. I highly recommend you listen to it. Guy's got a completely different opinion, but when you read the articles about the show, what you'll hear is Dr. Malone compared the COVID response to the Nazis. Well, he did say, I heard him say, point blank, that 500,000 people, and I think he meant in America, but it's probably more likely in the world, 500,000 people died needlessly because of the way the treatment was withheld and because of the ventilators and all the rest of the stuff. And and he's been vaccinated and stuff. So he has his opinion, okay? I highly recommend you listen, but listen to as much of it as you can handle. I mean, don't just listen to the excerpts, because, none of the experts even mentioned how credentialed Malone and the other guy were. Now, Neil Young got upset, and one of the things I learned from one of these is that Neil Young was a polio survivor, which I didn't know. And so he's a big fan of vaccine efficacy. And, I got the polio vaccine when I was a kid. I remember getting the sugar cube. And it's like legendary. It's like a mythology of vaccination, how the polio stopped basically instantly with the vaccine. But interestingly, maybe a year ago, I stumbled across a YouTube video that was an archive video of doctors from the United States and Europe talking about vaccines, probably, because of COVID. And they said, everybody in America thinks that the polio vaccine stopped polio. And perhaps it did. It's hard to say. But in Europe and Africa, polio also completely stopped at about the same time. And they didn't have the vaccine. So it may have been, remember, correlation is not causation. And I haven't verified this. I mean, you're going to go check it out. It's fine with me. I just had never heard anything like it. This was from a panel from the 80s, okay? So it wasn't in the context of COVID. It had nothing to do with COVID. It just said that we tend to elevate evidence that confirms our opinions. And that was not evidence I'd ever heard before, that it equally stopped. I have heard that viruses stop mysteriously. They stop. They've always stopped. All through history, we get viruses, and then they tend to get more contagious and less deadly, and then they stop. And then something new comes along, right? So, but the virologists that I've listened to, and I haven't listened to that many, and I don't know anything about this, said they're not quite sure why they stop. They do. So anyway, so this is one take. The company hasn't changed its existing and vowed to balance, and it makes it sound like Joe's got his tail between his legs. And Malone here, it says, compared the atrocities to the Holocaust. Yes, he did. And 270 medical professionals said that they thought he should be quiet and that Spotify should stop Rogan. That's not very many, to be honest about it. 270? You know, there's probably more than that in Waukesha County, right? But anyway, they wrote a letter. That's nice. And yeah, if I pissed you off, I'm sorry. That's the kind of apology. There was a few of them in there. Some other people besides Neil Young. Now, Neil Young, and not too many people mention this, Neil Young has all his music available on his own website. He probably owns his own catalog, unlike most recording artists, who sold the rights to a recording company, and in exchange for getting them started. And so he, unlike most, can say, I don't care about Spotify. Most artists would lose 30% of their business, just like that, if they pulled their catalog off. That's why you won't hear most artists doing it. Okay, Neil Young and Neil Young's old band. I didn't know Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young was Neil Young. I'd forgotten that connection. So those guys joined in with him. Well, so it's basically one band, Joni Mitchell. I heard that Barbra Streisand was thinking about it, but it's going to be hard because most artists would lose 30% of their revenue just by doing it. So, and we'll get to that with Ritson in a second. Better get over there. Okay. Excellent article by The Hustle, by Trung Pham, who I often cite. Just look at the picture of, just look at, I asked my daughter if she knew who Neil Young was. She, she's 30, so she's over 30, so she's on her way to maybe listening to this. Maybe that's the market for Joe Rogan. Maybe it skews more toward elderly than teenagers. Don't know. But the point is that these guys are not setting the world on fire with their trendy new music. They've gotten the royalties and that's what they got. So anyway, The Hustle said, here's the most interesting part maybe of the whole thing. The Hustle said, gee, it's funny. It's funny that Spotify has, they spent $100 million on Rogan, but they've also spent like crazy buying tools, buying content. And here's the issue. Spotify's gross margin has plateaued on music, has plateaued at 25%, because the more a song gets listened to, the higher the percentages that go to the artist. So there's a scale problem, is that if Spotify promotes a song and it catches on, they actually get less margin than if they just have millions and millions and millions of songs and they all get listened to a little bit. Interesting, isn't it? So they have a variable scale in commissions. On the other hand, Spotify's gross margins can get up to 40% in the audio ad marketplace, and especially within podcasts, because you don't put an ad in the middle of a song. It's just not going to do it. And Netflix did the similar thing when they started building their own content. Okay, but owning your content, yeah, then some of the things are hits and some of the things aren't, right? Now, Ritson gets at a more interesting issue. One thing he mentions is that Neil Young is I already said that, is a polio survivor. And he met Rogan long ago, before Joe was famous. And he says Joe is a little bit on his own path. And is willing to take a different perspective. And, he never intended his podcast, I've listened to him talk about it, to become very, very expansive and be the influencer that he is. His political beliefs encompass both gun rights and gay rights. Well put. He endorsed Bernie Sanders. Well, he didn't really endorse Bernie Sanders, but he said he kind of liked Bernie Sanders. And I think Bernie came on the show, in fact. He has little, if any, concern for the status quo or how it might make him look. I like that. And Ritson says, Rogan is a rare independent mind in a culture that seems increasingly tied to dogma and partisan perspectives. Okay, he has a skepticism. He's been wrong before. He's uncontrollable. But here's the issue. Here's the real issue. The real issue is that, and don't look at Spotify stocks. The real issue is that 5 companies represent 80% of the global streaming opportunity. And there's an incentive. The problem I have with cable and paying for sports is nobody has all the sports. You know, the Big Ten, there's the Big Ten network I'd have to sign up for. There's Major League Baseball. There's the NFL network. There's ESPN Plus, and none of them have it all. In fact, my daughter has ESPN Plus to watch MMA, and the big fights aren't even on it. Yeah, those are still pay-per-view. So you have a fragmented market, whereas in music, you can join one of these and get most of the music in the world. I mean, you have access to it. Okay, so there's 5 networks that basically control the music industry. And Spotify has 70 million songs and adds 60,000 every day. Okay? So there's literally millions of potential replacements. So if you say, oh, gee, Neil Young isn't on there anymore, well, listen to Cat Stevens or something. I mean, there's, you know, there's 100 other artists that sound like Neil Young. If you really wanted to hear that kind of music, I'm sure there's thousands probably on there, and you'd have an adventure. It would be kind of fun to go and try and replace and I'm sure there's YouTube videos or whatever how to replace Neil Young on your Spotify playlist. It would be a great video to read. If I knew more about music, I might do it. But losing access to 31% of the market is the difference between success and failure for many of the record companies that run these artists, okay? It's like this in retail also. Few retailers at the end of the distribution channels enjoy exactly the same dominion over their multitude of unfortunate suppliers. He says there's probably 2,000 Australian wine companies who'd like to get to the British consumer. There's 10,000 different bottles of wine then, because each of them have like 5 labels. And there's 5 retailers that control 70% of all off-premise sales. That means not in a bar. So they might have a maximum of 1,000 SKUs in any given store, and maybe 15% would be dedicated to Aussie wines. That gives 150 Australian wines. There's 10,000 competing supply options, 5 retailers, each with 150 slots. So he talks about a retail experience with a U.S. giant. The merchant who was selling the product, I think it was a famous wine brand, a very famous wine brand. They prepared for their annual negotiations with a U.S. retail giant. His team spent weeks looking at data, working with famous negotiations experts, role-playing the outcomes, preparing. On the morning of the meeting, he walked into a drab room in the retailer's headquarters. Typically, they're dumpy. I've been to Sam's Club headquarters. It was below dumpy. With his team behind him. They don't want to make it look like they're making any money. His opposite number smiled and suggested coffee. While they waited, the retailer offered an interesting insight for both teams to ponder. We ran the numbers over the weekend, and we estimate that we must be about 30 to 35% of your U.S. sales. We, the retailer, represent 35% of a third of your sales. The wine rep grimaced. The retailer's estimate was spot on. And guess what share of our total sales you represent to us? The wine executive grimaced again. Well, it's less than 0.00, it said, and he looked at his number 2 guy and said 0.00008%. It's like 8 millionths of our sales. Anywho, the retail said, suddenly becoming serious and opening the documents in front of him. Let's talk next year. I think that means goodbye. We don't care. We don't care about you at all because you don't represent anything. And Neil Young is in the same boat. And probably so is Barbra Streisand. And they've got their houses in the Virgin Islands, and so they're not going to get hurt. But a lot of recording artists would get hurt and aren't going to say too much. Okay? It's a point missed by too many marketers. That's why I'm talking to you about it. It's a point missed by too many marketers when they wildly advise brands to withdraw from certain retailers or extol them to push for better terms. It's nonsense talk. So I was hired by Chicago Cutlery, General Housewares is the name of the parent company. And they said, we'd like to do a catalog just like Williams Sonoma or the Chef's catalog. And I'd actually worked on the Chef's catalog a little bit. So I knew the category pretty well, and I was interested I'm interested in cooking. And so I said, great. So I put together a pro forma, and I showed how they could profitably grow to 10 million in sales in 5 years. I'd grown to 5 million in sales, or 10 million in sales, in 3 years with another company, so it wasn't a big stretch. And when I presented it, get down in the middle of Indiana, they said, oh, that won't even replace one retailer if they get mad because we do it. And that was it. And they understood it. You know, they were doing $100,000. No, I think they were doing $100,000 a month. I think they were doing about $1 million a year. And so what I should have done, if I was young, I wasn't that young, but I should have asked them what kind of growth they want. We could have gotten them we could have put them on any growth path they wanted. With mail, it's very, very scalable. But I didn't appreciate that we needed to get to 40 million or 50 million fast. And we had a plan for working with retailers. I mean, Sears, the way the Sears catalog worked was the catalog gave 10% of their sales back to the retail stores based on zip code or location. So the stores kept saying mail more because they were making more money on the rebate from the catalog than they were on the stores. And that was the truth. And so the stores kept wanting to mail more, so Sears was a $5 billion company and could have been a $3 billion company, probably profitable. But they were subsidizing the stores. So they were giving away a half a billion dollars back to the stores every year. Well, that knocks out profit pretty fast. So the accountants looked at it and said, well, they're not profitable. We need to shut them down. And that was probably the beginning of the end for Sears, because they had accountants making really dumb decisions. They fired 800 people. But this tells you how the world works. This is the real world, okay? Joe Rogan, as a podcaster, can contain ads in his show. Also, Joe Rogan's kind of been paid, so Joe Rogan has a flat cost and, a high upside. No matter how many people listen to Joe Rogan, Spotify already paid the cost. Okay. So, according to Ritson, none of the major artists will join the protest. They can't afford to. If anything, the saga and the attention it's drawn to Spotify and its influence in both spoken word and musical streaming will surely send its share prices higher in the months to come. I mean, a lot of the reason, Ritson rightly points out, a lot of the reason that Spotify has lost 40% of its value in the last year is because it went way up because of COVID. Entertainment options were limited. The number of audiobooks till you were sick of it. At least the podcast had fresh content, audio content. And so if you're stuck, you can listen to podcasts. You can listen to them while you worked out. You could probably listen to them on Zoom calls. So you could listen. You could listen to it was a big thing. Spotify became the big deal, one of the big deals in the media mix of the COVID lockdown. Lockdown's winding down, and so don't be surprised. At least that story has lost its punch. So it has the ultimate power of retail symmetry on its side, after all. And in Joe Rogan, a man who can play the game from any angle. Probably right. He's complicated. Have a great day. Like and share. Your friends will know you're smart. In the spirit of Joe Rogan, I went a little longer today. Now he goes 4 hours, and I never go this long, but I thought it was worth it. It was worth thinking about retail and distribution and margin and how that affects